Okay, welcome to the video. SIG Guy here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove and install the hammer in your Classic P series pistol. Whether you're cleaning it, upgrading it, tuning it, whatever the case may be, I'm going to show you how to get that taken care of today. The pistol I'm going to use is my 229 DASA Legion, and then the hammer we're going to be installing is the Armory Craft Skeletonized hammer. So with that, let's get started. Couple things really quick before we get started. First, I want to apologize if you can hear the background noise. It's one of the printers. It's probably 75% of the way through a 15-hour print. Secondly, the disassembly portion of this video, I kind of want to blow through it really quick. I've got several other videos showing you how to completely disassemble and reassemble the Classic P-Series pistols, as well as other pistols on my YouTube. So if you need something a little slower paced, a little more detailed, a little more where you can see everything that's going on, just check out one of those videos. And lastly, if you're interested in a toolkit, I do sell plenty of toolkits on my website, sigguy.com. I got a kit for the 365, one for the 320, one for the Classic P series, and then the deluxe kit here is one of everything in those three kits, so you have one of everything that I have to offer. So in this toolkit, we got our Sear spring screwdriver. That's very helpful on the Classic, and the 2 alignment punches to disassemble and reassemble the pistol. So enough jibber jabber, let's get started taking this apart. As always, the very first step working on any firearm is make sure it's a clear and safe firearm, okay? So for the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove our magazine. We're going to lock our slide to the rear. We're going to physically and visually check to make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine. Check our breech face, look away, do the same thing again. Chamber, magazine, breech face. We are working on a clear and safe firearm. Next, we're going to perform a field strip. So I'm going to rotate my takedown lever, release my slide. We'll put the slide to the side over here. And then the first step is to remove our grip panels. The next step, if you have an SAO like this one here, is to remove your manual safety, okay? So you got this cross bolt right here. Mine's 2.5 millimeter. You just remove that bolt, take this spring off. It's just resting around this post right here. And then you can pull this side manual safety right up and out of there. And then if it hadn't fallen out already, then you just pull this one out right here, okay? So that's really the only difference right now with the SAO versus the DASA. So I just wanted to point that out in case you're working on a single action only. All right, and for those of us doing DASA, there's many different ways you can skin a cat. Even on SAO, you can do this too. You can either start down here by removing your strut, your mainspring, and your mainspring seat, or you can start down here by removing this stuff. So just to keep my videos consistent, I'm going to start at this end here. So first of all, we need to make sure our hammer's in the forwardmost position, so hold it with your thumb as you pull the trigger. You don't want that to slam forward by itself. We're going to remove our takedown lever. We're going to remove our locking insert. A little spring on the side there, so don't lose that. I'm going to flip it over this way, and we're going to remove our trigger bar spring right here. And again, if you need a slower paced video, I have plenty on my YouTube. We're going to use our large alignment pin from our toolkit to push our trigger pivot pin out. Just like that. We'll remove that. We'll remove our slide stop. And then we're going to work our trigger and our trigger bar up and out of here. Now, before we do that, and I always recommend this on all my videos, before you start taking stuff apart, take your phone and do a video in all different angles all around the whole pistol, everything you're taking apart, okay? That way later on when you're reassembling and you're not quite sure the orientation of a part or where it went or where it came from, you can refer to the video. Video works best because you can zoom in on it. You can, use the scroller to go real slow and pause it. So highly recommended. So take a look at how our trigger and our trigger bar is in here. Our trigger bar is under this little shelf right here. On a lot of guns, it's very difficult to get the trigger bar up and past that. So if you're having a hard time, don't fight it, don't force it, don't bend anything, don't get your hammer and pry bar and try to get it through there. The stuff will fall out of there if it's in the right position, okay? When we reinstall it, it's pretty tricky to get this part of the trigger bar past our Sear. Sometimes our hammer pivot pin's in the way. Sometimes you got a safety that's in the way. So just look how it's orientated right now. And our trigger bar, most all trigger bars nest right up against our trigger or hammer pivot pin. Okay, just right like that. So that's kind of the position it needs to go back in. So a lot of pistols I've seen with scratches down here and stuff because they were forcing that trigger bar by this part of the frame, and it just gouges the frame. Okay, so I mean, if you look at how easy it comes out, if it's in the right position, it'll go in just as easy. Next, I'm going to remove my strut, my mainspring, and my mainspring seat. Again, make sure your hammer is in the forwardmost position. If it's cocked by accident, you have no trigger anymore to release it. What you're going to do is, on this side over here, this leg right here coming off of this part is called, that's the sear. All we need to do is pull this towards me, and that'll release the hammer from the sear, okay? So basically hold your hammer with your finger, get your fingernail on that piece there, pull it forward away from the hammer, and then that'll release your hammer, and it'll put in the forwardmost position. If your hammer's cocked back, it puts a lot of stress on this mainspring, and it's super hard to get this out, and it's even more difficult to get it back in if your hammer's back, okay? So make sure your hammer's, it's not going to go all the way forward, but it's in the forward resting position. So what we're going to do is I use a piece of painter's tape. I put it on my frame right here. And then I take my Sear spring screwdriver and I stick it under this portion of the spring. I'm going to cover this with my thumb so it doesn't go taking off. And I'm just going to pry this straight out. Oops. That was nice. Caught it. Pry it straight out. That'll release the mainspring seat from your frame. Usually it just kind of stays right there. This first time it's actually ever shot off like that on me. And then we can remove our strut and our mainspring. If your mainspring is basically jammed onto your strut like that, it's made to be like that, so sometimes you gotta give it a little bit to pull it off. So I was gonna edit that last part out of there, but I'm gonna leave it in. It just goes to show you that no matter how many times you do this stuff happens to everybody. You guys would not believe the amount of takes that some of these videos do, especially the reassembly part. Some of the stuff just fights you the whole way. I just try to make it look as easy as possible for you guys, so that way you can be more successful completing the task. But anyway, so moving forward, we're going to remove our sear spring, our ejector, and our safety lever. So our sear spring, you can see it is captured underneath this post right now. It's got some tension on it, so we're going to use the sear spring screwdriver in my toolkit. It's got a little notch in the end, and that is perfect for capturing our sear spring. Then we're going to pry it over and off the post and then release the tension, okay? So now we want to be very careful because all these parts have no tension on them right now. So the pins can easily fall out. We have two pins that we're going to be concerned with here. We have our hammer pivot pin, which is already fallen out. Then we have our sear pivot pin, which is up here. So just get in the habit of either having your pistol straight up and down like this, or the habit of putting your finger over these pins as you're tilting it to the side, okay? So now that our sear spring is disengaged, we're going to use our medium punch in our kit. We're going to put it through the top hole here. We're going to push our sear pivot pin out. Just like that. We'll set that aside. And then we can remove our punch. Now there's going to be 4 parts in here, like I said, our ejector, our sear spring, and our safety lever. So make sure that you have this down close to your bench when you remove it, so that way when the stuff falls out, you don't lose it. Your safety lever, oops, there's my hammer pivot pin. We're not ready for you yet. So our safety lever, there are many different sizes, shapes, styles, depending on which pistol you have and what kind of trigger setup you have. This is a pretty common one where it's really straight, the part that goes down in the pistol. SAO ones have like a notch in it. They can't slide straight down in. They got to kind of go in from the side. So just like I said, take a pictures, videos of all this stuff, you know, before you take it apart. Really zoom in on all this stuff here so you can see which way your safety lever goes, okay? Because some of them are the same depth as it is, you know, this side over here, so you could put it in upside down accidentally, you know, and then your stuff doesn't function if it even goes back together all the way. So again, just take a bunch of videos and pictures so that way you're 100% confident when you put this back together that that's the correct orientation that this goes in, okay? All right, so we have our ejector, our sear. This was that little leg we were pulling on earlier to release it from our hammer. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Our Sear spring can go in either way. There is no one side or the other side. They're both the same. And then, like I said, our safety lever. Okay, so make sure you got all those pieces. Next, what we're going to do is remove the hammer. If it hasn't fallen out already, your hammer pivot pin, we can use our large punch from our toolkit. Push out our hammer pivot pin. Remove that, and then your hammer will come right up and out of there. So now is the perfect time to clean everything inside and out if you so wish to do so. I know with my OCD I want everything nice and spotless, and then apply lubrication to the parts that need lube. That way when we put it all back together and return it to service, it's in perfect working condition, okay? So let's talk about our hammers really quick. We have the Armored Craft Skeletonized hammer here, and we have our factory hammer there. Definitely badass looking. I can certainly appreciate cool looking parts, but with the hammer, it's not all about the looks. The skeletonization, removing the mass there, actually increases the momentum of our hammer, okay? So with the lighter mass, this thing can cycle a lot faster, okay? And because the momentum is increased, it's actually hitting my firing pin a lot harder. So if you have light primer strikes every now and then, this certainly can take care of that problem as well. The hooks themselves have been, I've had this hammer in my pistol for quite a while, that's why it looks used. But the hooks themselves have been redesigned. They actually mimic the German X5, X6, which is going to give us a nice crisp trigger pull, okay, trigger break. And not only that, but during the testing of the hammer, in some of the pistols, it actually decreased the trigger pull weight. It's not advertised to decrease trigger pull weight, but they did find that in some of the pistols, it actually decreased the pull weight up to almost a half a pound. So just know that can certainly reduce your trigger pull weight as well, okay? So let me get this all cleaned up, and then we'll get our Armored Craft Skeletonized hammer installed and put this all back together. All right, so we're going to install our hammer first, but before we we do that, I want to talk about the installation of our strut in relation to our hammer, okay? Because a lot of people get this wrong at the very end when they're reassembling. So in our hammer, we have this cross bolt in there, okay? And then our strut, I'm going to call it a little saddle here, this little valley on the part itself, okay? So we install our strut. That little cross bolt needs to nest right into that little valley, okay? That way when our hammer is working, it's actually pushing down on our strut. A lot of times when people put their strut in, they don't have it far enough back to get it in that position. It's actually forward, and then that strut is in some other position other than underneath that cross bolt. So then when they go to push their hammer down, there's nothing for that cross bolt to push on. So the strut doesn't work at all, the trigger doesn't work at all, and they wonder what's going on. So when you put this through the hole in your frame, you just kind of pull it back as far as you can in that hole, and then it'll normally walk its way right up into the proper position, okay? So this is just easier to show you with everything out versus when we put it all back together. So let's put our hammer in and move forward. All right, so when we install our hammer, we got that cross bolt that we just talked about right there, and we have a hammer rebound spring right here in the back of your frame. We want that cross bolt underneath this spring, okay? So basically kind of grab your hammer, put it in there like so, and I use my finger in the back of it right here so it doesn't fall through, and then just kind of push it, work it up underneath that spring. You should be able to hang your frame by that spring by just holding the hammer. If your frame drops, obviously you're not captured on that spring. So you can see actually my bolt hole right here, my pinhole, everything's all lined up there. I'm going to put my hammer pivot pin right through there. It's the bigger pin of the two. Now this is a pretty loose fit, so it's going to probably fall out on you a couple times. Just get in the habit of kind of holding your finger over the back side of it if you're working on this side, and then the opposite if you're working on the other side. Next, I use a little vise like this. It's kind of acts as a third hand. It's super helpful. So I'm going to actually put the frame in here, and it's going to make installation of the Sear spring ejector and safety lever much easier. I'll kind of put it right here so we can kind of see what's going on, okay? So we got our ejector. It's got 2 holes in it. The front hole goes over the post that our Sear spring was under. Just going to put that in there just like this, and then we're going to rotate it down, and it's going to sit on the side of the hammer. Just like that. That's what keeps that in place. And then depending if you got SAO or DASA, on my SAO, I actually put this in not first. I put in my safety lever first because my safety lever can't drop straight down like this one's going to. It's got to kind of come in from the side. So if my Sear is in there, I can't drop it straight down past the Sear. It's got to come in through the side, okay? Because it's kind of like a notch. That parts go like this. It won't let me drop it straight down, okay? So if you got SAO, I put my safety lever in first. I hold it with a pin on this side, a slave pin. So I basically take this, put it through the hole, just like that, barely sticking through so my safety lever can sit on there. And then I put my ejector in, and then I put my Sear, and then my Sear spring in, okay? But the DASA, when we got a straight safety lever like this, it can drop straight in from the top, so we're going to do that part last, okay? So what I do is I come in from this side here. I'm going to put my, this is going to act like a slave pin. I'm going to put it in there and get it started like that. And then on our Sear, little pro tip here, if you use a Q-tip, the Q-tip with our Sear, now our Sear goes in like this, okay? This leg coming off of it is down and towards the right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Q-tip, I'm going to put it right in the middle of it right here. That's going to make it very easy to fish in there. So we can't come straight down because it needs to sit right in here. It's obviously too wide to get through our frame. So we got to come in through the front, go down below that post that the Sear spring's on, and come up in between that post and the hammer, okay? So I put this right in through the front here, and I use my finger on the side here to kind of help push it up through. Like that. I kind of start pulling it up into position. Make sure your pin is not blocking the way like mine was. And then I'm going to just kind of see if it goes through the hole there, which it did. I can remove my Q-tip. So as you can see, the Sear is captured by my alignment pin now. Next, I'm going to install my Sear spring. So I'm going to pull this out just a little bit, just like that. Grab my Sear spring, and again, this goes in either way. Put this down in that valley. Put my alignment pin through our Sear spring, just like that. And then lastly, with our safety lever, that's going to go in between my Sear and the frame, right over here. So I need to back out my alignment pin so I can see clearly that it'll fit in between these two pieces. And then this goes in with the smaller hook facing forward and the little bump facing up and the longer leg going down. Okay. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to put it right in on the side of the Sear in the frame. I'm going to kind of lower it down so the hole gets lined up, and I'll push my alignment pin all the way through. So you can really see the value in these pin alignment tools that are in the disassembly and reassembly kits. Working with the factory pins, it's very hard to get all these parts and pieces in there because your fingers are in the way. You can't see what's going on. These are longer. They got the handle here for more leverage and stuff. And then the ends over here are tapered, so they go through stuff nice and easy. So again, available on sigguy.com for the 365, the 320, and the Classic Series pistols. So my next step is going to be to reinstall the factory Sear pivot pin. So I'm going to use this pin to push out my slave pin. Okay, so we can go just like this. I'm going to kind of move things around, and then it's going to go straight through there just like that. Okay, and then next we're going to use our Sear spring screwdriver to take our spring leg here on the inside, bend it down, and put it underneath that post. Okay, make sure you guys can see this. Going to bend it down. Oops, and put it right underneath that post. Just like that. Okay, now that our Sear spring is captured on the post there, there's tension on all these parts, so our pivot pins are less likely to fall out. What I want to do is make sure that my pivot pins are in the proper position. So our hammer pin needs to be sticking out a little bit on both sides equally. Okay, this side as well. Our trigger bar kind of interfaces with this side over here. And then our Sear pivot pin is recessed on both sides. That way when our slide is running in the rail here, it's not hitting our pin. Okay? Both sides, make sure it's recessed. So while there's nothing here in this hole, my hammer, I want it in the forward position. I'm going to pull on my Sear again and pull my hammer forward, just like that. Okay? All right, next we're going to install our trigger and our trigger bar. And listen, sometimes this thing falls right in. Sometimes it takes you 2 days, okay? There's a lot of stuff, obstacles in the way that you got to work around. One, we got our Sear. That little leg on the Sear is always in the way. We got our safety levers in our way. Our hammer pivot pin's in the way. The little shelf here that our trigger bar goes underneath in the way. The trigger doesn't want to line up through the hole here properly. So when you go to an armor's class on the Classics, they actually recommend removing the safety lever when you're installing your trigger bar. It's actually the first step, one of the first steps when disassembling the Classic P series. So you can basically remove your Sear spring, the tension on it, drift out your pin a little bit, pull your safety lever out, push your pin back in, put your Sear spring back under the post there. That'll tension all these parts here. Now you don't have this safety lever hanging way down in the way, okay? And then once you get everything in there, you just reverse the process and put your safety lever back in. So if you're having a really hard time, and it's because you have a safety lever like this and it hangs down really low, just take that thing out of there, put your trigger bar by there with your hammer, your trigger in there, and then put it in afterwards, okay? So don't force anything, don't gouge anything, don't bend anything. It came out super easy. You saw when we pulled it out, it came out. Just everything's got to be in the right position, okay? So what I find easy is if I have my trigger like forward like that, just out of the way, I can get my trigger bar started, okay? Just like that. A lot of times people are caught up back here behind the Sear, okay? Or they're catching on the frame down here, this notch. So if you kind of get it up in there like that, get it past your Sear and everything, and you can kind of rotate your trigger around. Come on. Rotate our trigger around. Just like that. So you can hear it was kind of forcing there a little bit. If you got to force it like that, don't do it. Just pull it back out, go back in again. So I got the rear portion of my trigger bar all past that stuff. My trigger's through the hole so far. We're just going to slide it down into the frame. You can see it went underneath that shelf. Right now we're home free. That's the hardest part right there. Okay. So what we're going to do next is install our trigger pivot pin, which is this guy right here. It's got two little notches in the bottom. And it's got the slit in the side. This faces towards the left side. And then those notches need to be down in the 7 o'clock position, okay? So I'm going to put that in there just like this. I'm going to come up through the bottom here. I'm going to move my trigger around. It's going to come right through the hole, and I just put my finger over the side. We're going to rotate this. Actually, we don't need to do that yet. We're going to push it in just a little bit because our slide stop, we need to capture that with that pin. So just make sure this is in the proper position. I usually just rotate it up, stick it down inside here, capture it with the pin, just like that, and then just let it drop down into position. Now we're going to rotate this so it's parallel to the slide, the notch, and my notches in the pin are down at the 7 o'clock position. I can take my locking insert with my spring on there, and we can drop that right in there just like this. So a couple things we got to do here. One, we got to make sure our slide stop is not in the middle like that. It needs to be tucked all the way up against the side of our frame there, okay? Because our locking insert goes right in here, right here on this side. So our safety, our slide stop, we got to make sure it's all the way against the frame. Make sure this is perfectly flush here. That lines up those notches with our locking insert, the groove right here. And then make sure it's parallel to our slide. Make sure your hammer's forward too. If your hammer's back, this isn't going to go in. Just like that. Okay, before anything falls apart, I'm going to put my takedown lever in really quick. That'll lock everything together. Just like that. And then we'll flip it over to this side and we'll install our trigger bar spring. So just make sure your trigger bar is in the proper spot. Basically, my trigger bar nests up against my hammer pivot pin right here. Okay, that's in the proper spot. I'm going to kind of hold that with my finger. Or not. I'm going to put our trigger bar spring in the hole there. And then very important, a lot of people, I don't know how they're doing it, but they're hooking the trigger bar spring to the wrong part of our trigger bar. My trigger bar has a notch right here in the end. Okay, that's where my spring goes. On other trigger bars, I mean, there's holes in them and stuff like that, or a notch somewhere else, and they're putting the trigger bar spring in those spots there, and then they're got either a dead trigger or the trigger just doesn't work. It won't reset, whatever the case may be. Just make sure you took pictures and video before you took all this apart. Refer to it to see where your trigger bar was hooked up. That way we'll ensure that our trigger works properly when we put it all back together. Okay, we're on the home stretch. Basically our strut, our mainspring, and our mainspring seat. So we already discussed this in the beginning, and this is the hole I was referring to in your frame. So when I'm installing my strut, I'm going in through the hole. Make sure our hammer's forward too, okay? And I'm pulling it back against the frame here. I'm just kind of riding it along that edge, okay? And then maybe even take this part here and get as close to the frame as possible. So it's positioned like this rather than like this, okay? So I'm going to put it in the hole there. I'm riding it right along the back side of my frame. I'm looking straight down to see if I'm lined up with that notch in my hammer. As I'm riding it up in there, I got it as close to the frame as possible. Just kind of fish it around in there. You'll feel the notch that it needs to go into. So it's as far back as possible. The front portion down here, I had it as close to the frame as possible. That tips this part out as far as possible. I slid it up in between the groove there. And you can see it's relatively close to my frame right now. If yours is more towards the front, then it's not in the right spot. And what I'll do is I'll do a little test first. I'll push on my hammer and see if it's pushing down on my strut. That cross bolt's in that little saddle, and it's working properly. Okay? So I'm going to hold that pressure against my hammer with my strut so it doesn't come out. I'll put my spring on. And then our mainspring seat goes right on here. I'm going to put my finger through the frame like a trigger, like through the trigger guard. And then I'm just going to use my thumb and I'm going to push that mainspring seat up while pushing it down onto the frame so it anchors into the notches there, okay, while holding all this stuff so in case it slips, it doesn't go flying away. And there you go. And then we'll test it really quick. A lot of tension there. Works properly. Okay, before I install my grip panels, I'm actually going to install my slide first. I want to make sure everything works properly before I take the time of putting my grip panels on. So, trigger release is fine. Double action works fine. So everything works good. So next I'll put my grip panels back on. And we'll do the other side. Just like that. So the very last step when working on firearms, whether it's cleaning, maintenance, upgrading, whatever the case may be, we're going to always perform a function check before we return it to service to make sure it's in proper working condition. Okay, so you're going to need an empty magazine, ensuring that it is empty. And then we're going to be pulling the trigger a couple times, so we're going to make sure that we are still clear and safe. So we're going to physically and visually check, make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine, check our breech face, look away, do the same thing, chamber, magazine, breech face. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is install our magazine, make sure it locks into place nice and snugly, which it does. We're going to hit the mag release and remove the magazine, make sure it falls out under its own weight, which it does. Empty magazine, the follower is pushing up on my slide stop, so when I bring my slide to the rear, that follower should push that slide stop up into the notch on your slide, locking it to the rear, which it does. That works properly. We can now get rid of our magazine and release our slide. So muzzle in a safe direction, we're going to pull the trigger. That works properly. Holding the trigger to the rear, we're going to cycle our slide. We're going to test our reset. That works properly. Fire the trigger again. That works properly. Cycle the slide one more time. We're going to take it out of battery. Make sure your hand's not over the muzzle. Then we're going to pull our trigger. We have a dead trigger, so the safeties work properly. Pull the trigger. That works properly. So this pistol has passed the functions check. It is safe to return to service. All right, and there you have it. It's that easy to install the Armory Craft skeletonized hammer in your classic P series pistol. DASA on this one, and then if you have the SAO, you just basically remove your manual safety, and your safety lever, the way you put that in there is a little bit different as well. So nothing to it. I hope you enjoyed the video as always. I really appreciate everybody's support the past couple years. If you haven't been to the website lately, sigguy.com, there's tons of aftermarket parts and upgrades on there from all different types of manufacturers, as well as the toolkits and everything. And I'm also starting a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/SIGguy. And I'm going to offer special discounts, coupons, and some other information on there as well. If you have not liked or subscribed to my YouTube channel, there should be a subscribe button right down here in the corner. If you could smash that, baby, I'd really appreciate it. As always, thank you for watching, and have a good day.